Good morning, beautiful soul. Thank you for being here. I want to start by asking you a question that might stir something deep inside you. A question that isn't just about your plans, your dreams, or your goals, but about your heart, your spirit, and your readiness. Have you prepared for God? We live in a world where we're constantly striving, working, and pushing forward, but often we forget to pause and reflect. Are we truly ready for the blessings, the opportunities, and the transformations God is preparing for us? It's easy to pray for change, to ask for direction, and to believe that the best is yet to come. But what happens when God shows up? Are we prepared to receive all that He wants to do in our lives? Today, I want to remind you that preparation is not just about our external circumstances, but about the condition of our hearts. It's about positioning ourselves, both spiritually and mentally, to embrace the fullness of God's plan. And just like any great endeavor, the right preparation can make all the difference. So I ask you again, have you prepared for God? Understanding God's timing can be one of the most challenging aspects of faith. In a world where instant gratification is the norm, waiting for God's timing often feels like an exercise in patience and surrender. We live in a culture that encourages us to act quickly, make decisions on the spot, and demand results without delay. But God's timing is not bound by the constraints of our human schedules. His timing is perfect, and it operates on a completely different wavelength than the one we often try to impose on our lives. We often find ourselves in moments of frustration because what we desire does not come when we think it should. Maybe you've prayed for something, worked towards something, and yet the answer seems delayed or unclear. It's easy to get discouraged or wonder if God is even listening to your prayers. But here's where the key lies. God's timing isn't about waiting in vain. It's about His purpose and His plan unfolding at the right moment. The very nature of waiting on God is an invitation to trust that He sees the bigger picture, one that we may not fully understand in the moment. When we find ourselves in periods of waiting, it's easy to fall into the trap of doubt, questioning if what we're waiting for is even worth it. But what we fail to realize is that God is preparing us during these seasons. Waiting is not a passive activity. It's an active process of building character, strengthening faith, and growing closer to God. In moments when we feel like time is standing still, God is actually using that time to shape us. Our response in these moments speaks volumes about our trust in Him. Consider the story of Joseph. He had dreams of greatness, but his journey to those dreams was long and filled with unexpected detours. His brothers betrayed him, he was sold into slavery, and he spent years in prison. All the while, Joseph's faith never wavered. Even in the most unjust circumstances, he understood that his life wasn't dictated by immediate circumstances, but by a higher plan. He understood that his waiting was part of the process. God's timing would bring him to the right place at the right moment. And when Joseph finally rose to power in Egypt, he saw how everything that happened was a part of God's greater purpose. Similarly, many of us have dreams, aspirations, or desires for our lives, but the timing doesn't always line up with our personal schedule. We may want to move faster or take matters into our own hands, but when we do that, we miss out on the lessons that come with waiting. Sometimes we are not ready for the blessing we've prayed for. God knows when we are prepared and when we are not. He knows the right time to release what we need, and He's never early or late. He is always on time. In the waiting, we also discover more about our own heart. We learn what we truly value, where our priorities lie, and what we're willing to sacrifice for what we believe in. This period is one of self-reflection and growth. It allows us to understand the difference between what we want in the moment and what we need in the long run. In God's timing, what he brings into our lives is perfectly tailored to help us become the person we are meant to be. God's timing also teaches us to trust in his sovereignty. It reminds us that no matter how uncertain or difficult the waiting period may seem, God is still in control. The world may tell us that we need to rush, but God's word tells us that he is never in a hurry. He is patient, and he wants us to be patient as well. This is not a passive resignation, but an active, faithful trust in his wisdom and knowledge. While waiting for God's timing can be frustrating, it is one of the most powerful experiences in our faith journey. It refines us, strengthens our trust in him, and teaches us to let go of our own timing in favor of his perfect plan. The wait is never wasted. It is, in fact, a sacred process that prepares us for the incredible things God has prepared for us. Aligning your heart with God's purpose is a fundamental aspect of living a life that is truly fulfilling. Often we get caught up in our own desires, ambitions, and what society tells us is important. These external influences can easily distract us from God's greater plan for our lives. We might think that we know what's best for ourselves, or we might find ourselves chasing things that appear good on the surface, but fail to satisfy in the long run. In the midst of this, it's easy to lose sight of the deeper calling that God has placed on our lives. The question becomes, how do we realign our hearts with God's purpose? The first step in aligning our hearts with God's purpose is recognizing that our lives are not our own. We were created with a divine plan in mind, one that was designed by God from the beginning of time. This means that every decision, every challenge, and every moment of joy or pain is part of a larger story that God is weaving. It's a story that is not just about us individually, but about how we fit into his grand design. Understanding this is essential because it shifts the focus from our own personal desires to a bigger picture. His will, his timing, and his purpose. When we align our hearts with God's purpose, we begin to understand that our desires should be shaped by what he wants for us, not just by what we think will bring us happiness. Our hearts are designed to be in communion with God's, and this relationship is the foundation of everything we do. The Bible tells us in Psalm 37:4, take delight in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. This doesn't mean that God will give us anything we ask for, but rather that when we are truly aligned with him, our desires will begin to reflect his will. The more we seek him, the more we understand what he desires for us, and the more our hearts begin to mirror his heart. But alignment with God's purpose doesn't happen overnight. It requires a willingness to surrender our own will to his. This is where many of us struggle. We often hold on to our own plans and expectations, even when we sense that God is calling us to something different. Surrendering our will doesn't mean giving up on our dreams or desires, but rather submitting them to God and trusting that his plan is better. It's a process of laying down our pride, our need for control, and our own ambitions in favor of a life that is led by him. God is faithful. Faith is the belief that he has already equipped us with everything we need to face the challenges ahead. It is not the absence of fear, but the decision to trust God in the face of it. Faith gives us the courage to act even when the outcome is uncertain, because we believe that God is with us every step of the way. One of the most powerful aspects of faith is that it enables us to see beyond the immediate situation and look to the bigger picture. When fear tries to overwhelm us, faith allows us to shift our focus from the problem to the solution. It helps us remember that God is always working behind the scenes, orchestrating every detail of our lives. In the moments when fear seems all-consuming, faith reminds us that we serve a God who is bigger than our fears. He is bigger than any challenge we face, bigger than the obstacles that seem insurmountable. And when we place our faith in him, we can trust that he will guide us through. Throughout the Bible, we see countless examples of individuals who chose faith over fear, even in the most challenging circumstances. One of the most well-known examples is the story of David and Goliath. David, a young shepherd, was faced with a giant warrior who everyone else in Israel feared. The odds were stacked against David. He was small, inexperienced, and outmatched in every way. But David's faith in God was greater than his fear. He didn't focus on the size of the giant or the weapons at his disposal. Instead, he trusted in the power of God to deliver him. With just a slingshot and a stone, David faced Goliath and defeated him, not because of his own strength, but because of his unwavering faith in God's ability to overcome the fear and the giant before him. This story is a powerful reminder that our fears, no matter how big they may seem, are nothing in comparison to the power of God. The faith to move forward despite the fear opens doors to the miraculous. It is often in our moments of greatest fear that God reveals his greatest power. Fear can paralyze us, but faith propels us forward, allowing us to step into new levels of victory, growth, and spiritual maturity. It's important to note that faith doesn't mean that we won't experience fear or anxiety. It's natural to feel fear when we face challenges, change, or the unknown. However, the key is not to let fear control us. Instead of allowing fear to dictate our decisions, we need to remind ourselves of God's promises, his faithfulness, and his presence. His word tells us that he is always with us, that he will never leave us nor forsake us. In those moments, we are called to trust that he is working in us, through us, and for us, even when we cannot see the full picture. Faith over fear also means that we are willing to take risks in the pursuit of God's calling on our lives. It means that we choose to step out in obedience, even when the road ahead is uncertain. Many times, the steps of faith are not easy or comfortable. They require us to go beyond what we can see with our natural eyes and trust in the It's about choosing to obey God's voice even when the world around us is filled with doubt and discouragement. The act of stepping out in faith is an act of courage because it is a declaration that we trust God to guide us, protect us, and provide for us. Choosing faith over fear also involves letting go of the need for control. We often fear because we want to have control over the outcome of a situation. We want to know how things will turn out, when they will happen, and what steps we need to take to ensure success. But faith calls us to surrender our desire for control and trust that God's plan is perfect, even if it doesn't look like what we expected. Faith requires us to trust God with the unknowns and the uncertainties, knowing that he will lead us where we need to go. In moments of fear, the strength to move forward doesn't come from within us, it comes from God. It's his power, his peace, and his promise that enable us to keep going. When we choose faith over fear, we are choosing to believe that God is greater than anything we face, that his plan for us is better than anything we could imagine, and that he will never leave us to face our fears alone. Faith empowers us to take the next step, no matter how small or uncertain, and to walk confidently in the direction he is leading us. Spiritual readiness and growth are essential to living a purposeful and impactful life. Spiritual readiness is about being prepared to receive the blessings, challenges, and guidance that God has for us, while spiritual growth is the process by which we deepen our relationship with Him and mature in our faith. The two go hand in hand. Without spiritual readiness, growth can be stunted, and without growth, we can struggle to handle the challenges that come our way. Developing a strong foundation in both is key to navigating life's journey and fulfilling the purpose that God has called us to. Being spiritually ready is about aligning our hearts with God's will, opening ourselves to His direction, and embracing His timing. Often we think of preparation as something we do physically, mentally, or emotionally. But spiritual readiness goes beyond those aspects. It requires us to prepare our hearts, minds, and spirits to receive God's guidance and to walk in His purpose. This doesn't mean that everything will be perfect or that we will always be able to predict the next steps. But it does mean that we are postured and positioned to trust God, even when things don't make sense. To be spiritually ready, we must first acknowledge that we are not in control. God is. This shift in mindset is crucial because it helps us to let go of our own agendas and submit to God's plan. Spiritual readiness involves humility, recognizing that our understanding is limited and that God's wisdom far exceeds our own. It is easy to get caught up in our own desires and timelines, but spiritual readiness calls us to surrender those desires to God and trust that He will lead us in the right direction. This process requires patience, as it may not always happen on our timeline, but the readiness to accept God's will in His time helps us navigate life with peace and confidence. As we grow spiritually, our ability to discern God's voice and respond to His calling increases. Growth in our faith is not just about acquiring knowledge, but about cultivating an ongoing relationship with God. Spiritual growth involves seeking Him daily, being in prayer, reading His word, and allowing the Holy Spirit to guide us. This continual process helps us develop the character and strength needed to handle life's challenges. It enables us to grow in love, patience, and kindness, and equips us to live out God's commands in our everyday lives. Spiritual growth is also deeply intertwined with our ability to endure hardships and challenges. Life will undoubtedly present obstacles that test our faith, but these are opportunities for spiritual growth. Just as physical muscles grow stronger through resistance and effort, our faith muscles grow stronger through adversity. It's in the hardest moments of life that we often experience the most profound growth. When we face trials, we are given the chance to lean on God in ways that deepen our relationship with Him. Through trials, we learn to trust His provision, seek His strength, and rely on His promises. However, spiritual growth is not always a linear process. There will be times of progress and times of setbacks, times when we feel close to God and other times when we may feel distant. During these periods, it is important to continue pursuing Him, even when the road seems difficult. Growth often happens in the seasons when we feel least connected to God, because it is during these times that we must dig deeper into our faith. We cannot rely solely on our emotions or circumstances to measure our spiritual maturity. Our growth is rooted in our willingness to keep moving forward, even when it feels challenging or uncertain. Furthermore, spiritual growth involves recognizing that we are never meant to walk alone. We are called to grow in community, to learn from others, and to support one another on our spiritual journeys. The Bible emphasizes the importance of fellowship, of encouraging one another, and of bearing each other's burdens. Spiritual readiness requires us to be open to the wisdom and support of others and to be willing to share our own experiences to help others along the way. Growth happens not only in solitude, but in the context of relationships, both with God and with others. To foster spiritual readiness and growth, we must also remain open to change. God's plan for us is ever evolving, and as we grow, we will be called to new levels of service, responsibility, and leadership. Sometimes this means stepping out of our comfort zones and embracing new opportunities or challenges that we may not have anticipated. Spiritual growth involves being open to these changes and trusting that God is leading us towards something greater. It means being willing to let go of old habits, old thinking patterns, and old fears in order to embrace what God has for us in the next season of life. As we develop spiritually, we also become more attuned to the needs of those around us. Growth in our faith leads to a deeper compassion for others and a greater desire to serve. We begin to see the world through the lens of God's love, and this transforms how we interact with others. Spiritual growth isn't just about personal development. It's about becoming more like Christ so that we can be a light in the world and share his love with others. Spiritual readiness and growth are lifelong processes. We never arrive at a point where we stop growing or become fully prepared for everything life throws our way, but by continually seeking God, growing in his word, and embracing his plan for our lives, we can become the people he has called us to be. We can step into each season with confidence, knowing that we are ready to face whatever challenges come our way, because God is with us, guiding us every step of the journey. Trusting the process of transformation is an integral part of our spiritual journey, yet it is one of the most challenging aspects of faith. Transformation, whether it's personal, emotional, or spiritual, rarely happens overnight, and it almost always requires us to step outside of our comfort zones. It involves growth, discomfort, and the willingness to become something different than we were before. Transformation can feel uncertain, even painful at times, but it is an essential part of the process of becoming who God has called us to be. Learning to trust this process is one of the most important things we can do in our walk with God. The process of transformation often involves a stripping away of old habits, mindsets, and ways of thinking. We come to God with our past, our mistakes, our fears, and our struggles, and we long for him to do something new in us. However, the work of transformation is rarely a quick fix. It is a gradual process that takes time, patience, and perseverance. The old self doesn't disappear instantly. It is replaced little by little, moment by moment, as we yield to the work God is doing in our hearts. Sometimes this process can feel slow, and we may even question whether change is really happening. But just as a seed takes time to grow into a tree, the process of transformation takes time as well. And we must trust that God is working in ways we cannot always see. Trusting the process of transformation means being willing to let go of control. Many of us struggle with the desire to manage our own transformation or to dictate how quickly it should happen. We may feel frustrated when change doesn't come as fast as we expect or when things don't turn out the way we imagine. But the process of transformation requires us to surrender our timelines and trust that God knows what he is doing. He sees the bigger picture and his timing is perfect. When we try to rush the process or force things to happen according to our own understanding, we often find ourselves facing unnecessary struggles or setbacks. It's in those moments that we need to remind ourselves that God's process is always for our good, even when it doesn't make sense. The process of transformation also requires us to confront and release parts of ourselves that are not aligned with God's will. This can be a painful process, as it often involves letting go of things that have been deeply ingrained in us. Patterns of thinking, unhealthy relationships, or destructive behaviors. But God is faithful in helping us navigate this part of the process. He doesn't expect us to do it alone. He is with us every step of the way. And while the work of transformation can feel uncomfortable, it is ultimately for our growth and freedom. Each step of the process brings us closer to the person God has designed us to be. Another important aspect of trusting the process of transformation is recognizing that it isn't about perfection. It's about progress. We live in a world that often places unrealistic expectations on us, pushing us to be perfect, flawless, and successful in every way. However, God's process of transformation is not about perfection. It is about becoming more like Him over time. We may stumble along the way, but that doesn't mean we're not progressing. Each mistake, each failure is an opportunity for growth. God doesn't condemn us when we fall short. Instead, He uses those moments to teach us, refine us, and help us grow stronger.